Hey everyone, and welcome back. We're going to be diving into something pretty interesting this week, something that really caught my eye, this whole idea of a mystical path and how it connects to wisdom. I don't know about you, but with these Catholic readings this week, it feels like we're really about to uncover some deeper meaning. So you know how we talk about a mystic? And often what comes to mind is someone who values wisdom above all else, like riches or worldly success. It's like they've found something more important than all that stuff. But this is what I find so interesting. What makes that connection mystical? What sets them apart? What makes them a mystic? You know, one of our sources defines a mystic as someone who experiences a special, unchosen union with God. And get this, a union that's initiated by God, not the individual. Well, that's kind of mind-blowing when you really think about it, isn't it? Like, it's not a choice you make to become a mystic, but a calling.
It really is something, isn't it? I mean, when I read that definition, it immediately reminded me of something Carl McColman wrote. He's a scholar of Christian mysticism. And he said, no one chooses to be a mystic. It is God's call. And I think that idea of this divinely initiated connection is what really sets the mystic apart from, say, a philosopher. Evelyn Underhill, she's another big name in mystical studies, put it this way, she said, where the philosopher guesses and argues, the mystic lives and looks. It's like mystical knowledge is less about abstract thought and more about this direct personal experience of the divine.
Yeah, I see what you mean. It's definitely a different way of experiencing and understanding things. And it makes you think about what that experience actually looks like.
Right, exactly. And it's not always about visions or anything like that. It's much more grounded in everyday life than people might think.
And I think that's what we're going to be exploring today, those everyday experiences of the mystical,
Exactly. Those everyday encounters with the divine, we could say.
and how those encounters can lead us to a deeper understanding of wisdom.
Precisely. That's the heart of it, I think.
It's like wisdom becomes less about knowing a bunch of facts and more about this lived experience, this relationship.
Yeah, and a way of seeing the world, a way of being in the world.
And that, I think, is something we can all connect with, regardless of whether we identify as a mystic or not.
Absolutely. It's a universal human longing, this desire for wisdom, for connection, for something more.
And maybe, just maybe, this exploration of the mystical path can help us tap into that longing a little more deeply.
I think so too. I think it has the potential to open us up to a whole new way of seeing ourselves and the world around us.
Well, I'm certainly excited to dive in and see where this path leads us.
Me too. Let's do it. That actually reminds me of this week's Take 5 piece that really resonated with me. It talks about how that word mystic, it points to something much deeper, something essential to our relationship with God. Like suggests that we're all called to this kind of union, this mystical union, even if we don't necessarily have like visions or supernatural experiences.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's definitely not about those extraordinary events. And it's not just some like fringe idea either. The catechism actually backs this up. It
Right.
reminds us that every single one of us, we're all called into this really intimate union with God. It's just that what does it call it? The special graces of a mystical life, they might show up differently for each person.
Yeah.
You know what I thought was interesting? I never really thought of the sacraments as like holy mysteries in this context before, but the catechism connects them to this very journey of mystical union. It's like they become these concrete, tangible ways we connect with the mystery of Christ.
I love that tangible ways we connect with the mystery of Christ. That's a great way to put it. It's not always about, these big dramatic displays of faith. It can be as simple as how we interact with the world around us.
Exactly. And speaking of tangible connections, the readings this week really hit home on this whole idea of seeking wisdom. Especially in the book Wisdom, there's this passage where the author, who most scholars believe is King Solomon, the wisdom guy himself, well, he talks about how much he values wisdom over like all the material possessions and worldly achievements he could ever want. He actually says, I prayed and prudence was given me, I pleaded, and the spirit of wisdom came to me. And he goes on to say, I preferred her to scepter and throne and deemed riches nothing in comparison with her. He even compares gold and silver to wisdom and says they basically pale in comparison. Talk about having your priorities straight, right?
It's such a powerful statement. And you know what it makes me think of? The gospel reading for this week. The story of the rich young man who just can't seem to let go of his wealth to follow Jesus. It's almost like these two readings, they're two sides of the same coin. You know what I mean?
Totally. It's like on the one hand, you have this powerful message about seeking wisdom above everything else. And then on the other hand, we see how hard it can be to actually let go, to detach from material possessions. And it's not like this guy was a bad person. He was genuinely seeking something more.
It really highlights the paradox, doesn't it? Because wisdom, even though it's more valuable than any earthly treasure, it's freely given by God. It's not like something we can earn or buy or achieve through our own efforts. It's a gift we receive when we open ourselves up to the divine.
It reminds me of that line from, what was it, the responsorial psalm, Psalm 90, about remembering that our days are numbered and we need
Wow.
to seek wisdom of heart. It just feels so relevant, you know?
Mm.
Especially these days, our world is so busy and chaotic, it's so easy to lose sight of what really matters.
Oh, I completely agree. And that actually makes me think of the grows as a disciple section this week. It talks about those camels and needles that can get in the way of us finding wisdom and deepening our relationship with God. What do you think? What are some of those camels we face in our modern lives?
Hmm, that's a good question. Well, the text mentions things like wealth, health, and beauty as potential distractions. And when you think about it, those are all things that so many people strive for. It's not that they're inherently bad, I don't think, but it's more about where our focus lies.
Yeah.
What are we willing to sacrifice in pursuit of those things?
Exactly. And it brings us right back to the story of that rich young man.
Yeah.
Right. He seemed like a good person trying to follow the commandments, but it was his attachment to his possessions that ultimately held him back. It makes you wonder, what are we holding on to, maybe even without realizing it, that might be preventing us from growing spiritually?
That's a tough question to ask ourselves, for sure. But even with all these challenges, the readings this week also offer a message of hope. Like in Mark, where Jesus says, "For human beings it is impossible, but not for God. All things are possible for God."
That's so powerful. We're not alone in this journey. Seeking wisdom, this mystical path. It's not about being perfect or detaching ourselves from everything. It's about surrender, about opening ourselves up to something bigger than us and trusting that God's grace will guide us.
Yeah, I love that. And it makes me think about how the Acts section this week emphasizes the importance of prayer and scripture in our lives. It's a good reminder that wisdom isn't just something we read about, it's something we cultivate through our relationship with God. So I think if there's one thing to take away from our dive this week, it's that this path of seeking wisdom, this mystical path, it's open to all of us. It's about aligning ourselves with the divine, figuring out what truly matters, and having faith in something larger than ourselves. And before we wrap up, I wanted to leave you with one final thought. We've been talking about the challenges of letting go, and I can't help but think about that idea from the readings of selling all you have for true wisdom. So here's my question for you to ponder. If you had to choose just one thing to give up to gain a deeper connection with God, that wisdom of heart, what would it be and why? It's something to think about. Until next time, keep seeking, keep asking those tough questions, and keep diving deep.